So I like to title this presentation of the Earth as a system of systems as stuff you should have already learned, because that's what it is. We're going to review it really quickly just to make sure that everybody's on the same page as we begin this course, but it is largely review. If it's stuff that you do not need to, take extensive notes on it, but just be aware that everything in here is background knowledge for going forward with everything that we do in this course. So Earth is a single interconnected system. There's a principle in environmental science that everything is connected. Changes to one part of the Earth's system are likely to affect other parts of the Earth's system and produce outcomes that were completely unexpected. One of the things that I did in college was some Earth modeling things on computers, and those are really, really intensive mathematical exercises because the Earth system is so complex and it has so many variables that you need supercomputers to actually do some Earth modeling. By the way, I put in here, see the Mono Lake case study. In chapter 2 of Friedman and Relaya, there is a case study on Mono Lake. That case study is famous. Every single one of the Friedman and Relaya chapters begins with a case study. Don't skip them. They are going to be part of your reading quizzes. They're in there for a reason. They are all very famous case studies, and we'll be doing case studies throughout the year as classroom exercises as well. So environmental studies and environmental science is multidisciplinary because no one field of science can answer all parts of an environmental question. And again, as we go through the course, we're going to be doing some systems thinking exercises and some what we call jelly bean discussions, which you should have already been exposed to a little bit in class, about different perspectives and different ways of thinking about environmental questions and problems. So as a definition, a system is a set of interacting components connected in such a way that a change in one part of the system affects other parts of the system. And that is the definition from Friedman and Relaya, chapter 2. So many of our most pressing environmental concerns occur on a global scale. So that understanding complex systems, like I was talking about the Earth modeling, that underlie these global systems is key to developing approaches that address the problems. When we're talking about systems, the boundaries of where systems start and stop are defined by the researcher's point of view. And anytime that we're talking and using our systems thinking framework, we're going to have to be talking about the boundaries of the systems that we're thinking about. One of the things that I like to make an analogy with here is in biology. Let's say that you're a cytologist. You're somebody who studies cells, right? So what's your system? Well, your system is the cell, and the cell is the boundary of the systems that you study. Okay, well, that's great. So let's say that you are a doctor, a doctor for humans, right? So what's the system that you study? Well, it's the human body. Is a cell part of a human body? Absolutely. But your system is bigger. Does it include other systems? Of course it does. So every time we go up in a level of complexity, you're increasing the system's boundary that you're talking about. We could go smaller than the cell too. Like let's say that you're a researcher for mitochondrial diseases or something along those lines. So the boundaries of the system are defined by the researchers themselves. Okay, so matter and energy, you guys know this. They both cycle through systems, and obviously they cycle through the Earth system as well. So in order to understand systems, we have to understand energy flow. All environmental systems consist of matter. You guys already know the definition of matter. Matter is anything that occupies space and has mass. And mass is the measure of the amount of matter that an object contains. Mass and weight are not the same, and you already know this too. Weight depends upon gravity where you are. Mass does not. Atoms are the basic building blocks of matter. See, I told you should already know most of this stuff, but it underlies everything that we're talking about, so it's just a little refresher. An atom is the smallest particle that can contain the chemical properties of an element, and an element is a substance composed of atoms that cannot be broken down into smaller, simpler components. Now, we all know that atoms can be broken down into smaller, simpler components, but once they are, they're no longer that element. An element is defined as the way those atoms are put together. Elements are organized according to the periodic table, and there she blows right there. Molecules are particles that contain one or more atoms. Compounds are molecules containing more than one element in a definite ratio. The nucleus of an atom contains protons, which are positively charged, and neutrons, which are, they have mass, but they don't have charge. And again, all this should be reviewed. The atomic number of an element refers to the number of protons in its nucleus and is unique to each element. The mass number of an element is the total number of protons and neutrons in the nucleus. We're going to be talking about isotopes a fair amount when we talk about isotopes of carbon, specifically for understanding global climate change and carbon dating. Electrons, negatively charged particles, very little mass, but they do have mass. They orbit the nucleus in varying energy levels. And of course, the configuration of the electrons, especially in the valence shell, are what determines the bonding properties of an element, and we all know that already. Isotopes of an element are atoms that have a different amount of neutrons than the most common form of the element. The biggest one here is going to be carbon that we talk about in this course. Unstable isotopes are radioactive, and they undergo radioactive decay, which is the spontaneous release of material from the nucleus. One of the types of math that you need for this course is to understand half-life and how to do radioactive decay problems. So you'll have some practice with that this first 6 weeks. Radioactive decay changes the element into a different element. Why? Because it changes the number of protons in the nucleus. The definition of what an element is based on the number of protons. So if you're decaying and materials coming out of your nucleus, which happens to be protons in radioactive decay, then you're actually changing into a different element, not just an isotope of your original element. The average rate of nuclear decay of a quantity of a radioactive element is called its half-life. Again, this is just the definition. And that's the time it takes for 1/2 of the original parent atoms to decay. And there's different ways of stating this. You'll see this in your when we do the math problems. So we can be solving for the number of atoms. We can be solving for the mass. It just depends on what the question's asking. Knowledge of half-lives of various elements helps scientists understand how long these elements pose a risk to human environmental health. Nuclear waste is an environmental issue that we are going to explore this year, and we need to understand how long certain isotopes and certain isotopes of different elements, plutonium, uranium, whatever it is, thorium, tend to stick around in the environment and pose a risk to human health. So we have to understand half-life math in order to figure that out. And that's actually usually how the test frames the questions. How long will this element be a danger to human health? And they kind of give you some parameters on this. Atoms combine via chemical bonds. There are 3 main types of chemical bonds: covalent, ionic, and hydrogen. Covalent is where the electrons are shared between 2 or more atoms. It's the strongest of chemical bonds. Ionic bonds is the transferring, gain or loss of electrons between 2 or more atoms, and it creates a charged molecule. And then hydrogen bonding is a weak attraction between 2 hydrogen atoms. Hydrogen bonding actually plays a large role in the properties of water, and water is a unique substance we'll talk about in this presentation, and it is what enables life on Earth. So hydrogen bonding is actually, although it's a weak attraction, it's actually a very, very strong force that allows life on Earth to actually be present. All right, so I told you that we would be talking about the properties of water. Life on Earth would not exist without water, period, the end. We are dependent upon water. In fact, water is so essential to life that life as we understand it, that astrophysicists are no longer searching for extraterrestrial life. They're searching for liquid water. So back in the 60s and 70s, when we were beginning space exploration, people were like, oh, let's find aliens. But now we're looking for water, because what we've realized is that water is pretty much, as we understand life, as we know it, it can't exist without liquid water. So we feel like if we can find liquid water on exoplanets, there's a high probability of finding life. And that whatever life means, could it, whether that's bacteria or whatever, liquid water is kind of essential to how we understand how life works. So water has several unique properties that allow life to exist. These include a high surface tension, capillary action, a high boiling point. Water has a volume in its solid form that's larger than its liquid form, which is actually unusual. Water expands when it freezes. a high specific heat capacity, and the ability to dissolve many substances. All right, so let's talk about that water, the stickiness of water due to hydrogen bonding. Cohesion and adhesion is what we're talking about here. So water molecules cohere to each other, which leads to water's property of surface tension. Water molecules adhere to other surfaces, which leads to water's capillary action. And these are all properties that you should have learned in chemistry. All right, so take a look at the pictures here on this slide. Here, the water strider up here can walk on water because water has surface tension. It's a result of the water's cohesive property. Ice floats on water because water expands in volume as it freezes, which is a unique property. If this didn't happen as water on the planet froze, it would sink to the bottom and lakes would freeze from the bottom up, and we would have like solidly frozen lakes. Instead, what happens is as ice expands as water expands in volume, when it freezes, the ice floats on top and the liquid water remains underneath. This preserves aquatic life underneath because they're still in the water. Otherwise, they'd all freeze to death. Down here, plants uptake water via capillary action, which is a result of water's adhesive property. We couldn't have plants if we didn't have water's adhesive property because they could not uptake water through their roots. And if you take a look at this one, the molecular structure of liquid water is here on the left, and solid water, which is ice, is here on the right. So you can see that ice actually has when you look at the molecular structure, has a more regular molecular structure than liquid water. And you can see that the space in between there is actually filled with air, which gives it its property of being able to float. Water is the only substance on Earth that occurs naturally in all three states of matter at temperatures normally found on the planet. And here's the deal. Temperatures normally found on the planet. Other elements can naturally exist in all three states of matter, but not at temperatures normally found on the planet. Water is the only substance that can do that. Again, hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonds in water means it takes a large amount of energy input, to either raise or lower the temperature of a given amount of water. That's the definition of specific heat capacity, by the way. So water has a high specific heat capacity because it takes a large amount of energy input to raise or lower the temperature of a given amount of water. This means that water helps protect Earth from wide temperature variations, making it easy for life to flourish. The narrower the range of the highs and lows on the surface of a planet, the easier it is for life to evolve and flourish. It also means that areas that are close to large bodies of water are cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter than areas that are not close to water. So if you think, let's picture the map of the United States real quick. The coasts, the West Coast and the East Coast, those areas at the same latitude, if you were to follow a latitude line across from a city on a coast into the interior, the city on the coast is going to have a much narrower range of temperature fluctuation than a city at the same latitude that's in the middle of the country. And the reason for that is because there's the mitigating effect of being close to a body of water. It's cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter because of water's high specific heat capacity. Water is sometimes referred to as the universal solvent by scientists, and you may have heard that before. Water is a polar molecule, and because of that, it easily dissolves other polar substances. You've heard the phrase like dissolves like before. This is great for living organisms who store nutrients in solution inside their cells, and of course, this polarity is what allows water to go back and forth so easily across our cell membranes. But it also means that toxic and harmful substances also dissolve well in water. So when we're talking environmentally about chemical pollution, the ability of water to dissolve anything polar makes it easier for polar pollution molecules to be transported through the environment via water. Any place that has flowing water and in particular sandy soil is going to be more prone to the spread of pollution through the area. than a place that is drier and has a different type of soil. And we're going to hear about soil later, but yeah, moving water can very much transport unwanted substances through the environment. Okay, acids, bases, and the pH scale. So an acid is a substance that contributes hydrogen ions to a solution. Acids range in pH from 0 to 6.9, and that's kind of shorthand. I mean, it can go 6.91, 92, you can break that however you want. But you guys know that in the middle of the pH scale, we have pure water, which is a balance of hydrogen and hydroxide ions. Pure water is a pH of 7. So we're going to just say for this course, acids range from 0 to 6.9. Bases are substances that contribute hydroxide ions to a solution, and bases then would range from 7.1 to 14. And in the middle, of course, is pure water with a pH of 7, perfect 7, because it is a perfect balance of hydrogen and hydroxide. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14, and we've already said that 7 is perfectly neutral, and it's a balance of hydrogen and hydroxide ions. Pure water is pH neutral. Normal rainwater is slightly acidic. Normal rainwater, and you're going to see this several times, I write it on almost all the slides where we talk about this. The pH of normal rainwater is about 5.6. That's a test question, and that's why I write it on there all the time. Blood is slightly basic. The pH scale is logarithmic. And there's going to be other logarithmic scales that you need to know. You need to know the pH scale for this course as well. So there's a factor jump of 10 between each number on the scale. That means a pH of 5 has 10 times the concentration of H plus ions than a pH of 6, and 100 times more hydrogen ions than a pH of 7. So every time you jump a number, you jump 10 times. You multiply by 10. You guys already know that. We're going to talk here shortly in another presentation about the Richter scale. That's another one that's logarithmic. Same deal. Every time on a logarithmic scale, between each number, you jump 10 times. There will be multiple choice questions where they ask you those kinds of very simple math questions. So chemical reactions are a big deal in obviously a lot of science classes, but they're a big deal in this class too, and there's several of them that you need to know quite well. We're going to talk about them all year long, but you guys know in a chemical reaction, matter is neither created nor destroyed, which is the conservation of matter. The bonds between atoms, though, in a chemical reaction often change. Remember that Earth's a system, right? And the conservation of matter tells us that we can't easily dispose of toxic materials in one part of an interconnected system without seeing a change in another part of the system. There is a phrase in environmental science when people say, oh, throw that away. Well, there is really no away, because we are a system in which we're closed to material coming in and out of the system. If you think about Earth, right, we've got an atmosphere. What comes in every day? Well, energy comes in every day via the sun, but matter doesn't. The matter that's here is the matter that was here when the Earth was created, with a few minor exceptions. And we're not shooting matter off into space either. So when we destroy or alter matter, or alter part of the way the system works, in one part of the Earth system, there will be a consequence in another part. Now, is it something that we may notice right away? Possibly not. Is it something that people would be able to see with the naked eye on a daily basis? Maybe not. But that doesn't mean it's not happening just because we can't immediately observe it. Humans are short-lived creatures, and the Earth system is a very, very long-lived system. So, the principle of systems thinking tells us that when we change parts of a closed system, other parts are changing as well. Okay, biological molecules and cells. Chemical compounds come in two types. You can have an inorganic or an organic compound. And you guys know that inorganic compounds do not contain carbon. Or actually, inorganic compounds can contain carbon, but the carbon is bound to elements other than hydrogen. So you don't have those carbon-hydrogen bonds. For this class, we're going to mainly talk about elements that don't contain carbon. Organic compounds are compounds that have carbon-carbon bonds or carbon-hydrogen bonds. Organic compounds are the basis of biological macromolecules. You guys are super familiar with these: carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids. Carbohydrates are molecules composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Carbs can be simple, like mono and disaccharides, or they can be complex, like polysaccharides. Glucose, that chemical formula for glucose is something that you have to know. It's used, obviously, in the equation for photosynthesis and cellular respiration, but you just have to memorize it. It's a simple sugar that's produced by plants during photosynthesis, and it's the fuel that is used by all cells for energy. Starch is a polysaccharide, and it is how plants store energy. Cellulose is another polysaccharide, and it's the material that makes up plant cell walls. It's also the raw material for ethanol, which is an alternative fuel. So when we're making either biodiesel or we're making ethanol from corn or from sugarcane stalks, it's the cellulose that's being broken down to create the ethanol. Okay, proteins are molecules of long nitrogen-containing units called amino acids. Proteins are used by organisms for structural support, energy storage, internal transportation, and defense against foreign substances. Enzymes are specialized proteins that catalyze chemical reactions. As I scream to my 9th graders, enzymes are proteins, enzymes are proteins, enzymes are proteins, but you know that. Prions. Prions actually freak me out and are super interesting. They come into play in this class because specifically of mad cow disease. So prions are a type of misfolded protein. They're a protein that is not folded correctly. Proteins have 4 levels of structure, which we call folding structure. And 1 or more of those folded levels are incorrect in a prion. They are responsible for bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which we call mad cow disease in cows. There's another disease called scrapies, and it's caused by misfolded proteins, prions in the brains of sheep. Scrapies is the name of that. And then in humans, if humans eat the infected brain tissue or neurological tissue of a sheep that's infected with scrapies or a cow that's infected with bovine spongiform encephalopathy, in humans, this is called Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome, and it's the same deal. The prions actually induce misfolding in other proteins in the brain, and you have the brain turns into a sponge-like material, and then you die. It's pretty not good. Nucleic acids are molecules that are found in all cells. There are 2 types of them, DNA and RNA, and we all know that there's subtypes of RNA. We're not going to get a ton into that in this class. Nucleic acids contain the genetic code, which allows organisms to reproduce. Lipids are molecules that do not mix with water. They comprise cellular membranes, as well as obviously other stuff. Examples of lipids includes fat, waxes, oils, steroids, and most hormones in human and animal bodies. Cells are the basic unit of all life. A cell is a highly organized living entity that consists of biomolecules and other substances in a watery solution surrounded by a membrane. Sometimes you see that listed as cytoplasm. Sometimes you see that listed as cytosol, but that's that watery solution. You guys know that cells can be prokaryotic, meaning that they do not contain a nucleus or specialized organelles outside of ribosomes, or they can be eukaryotic, which means that they contain a nucleus, and the nucleus encloses the genetic material, and they have a whole bunch of specialized organelles. Examples of prokaryotic cells are archaea and eubacteria, and of course eukaryotic cells are pretty much everything else that lives in the world. Okay, so this slide just has some kind of cool, colorful pictures of cells. Right here is halobacterium. Oops, moving that around. We want to do this. There we go. Halobacterium is a salt-loving type of archaebacteria. So you actually find this type of bacteria in heavily salted water. This is E. coli right here. E. coli is a eubacteria, meaning that it is one of the bacteria. It's well, I don't want to say it's a little bit more advanced, but eubacteria and archaebacteria are obviously 2 different types of bacteria. The eubacteria evolved slightly later than archaebacteria. Okay, chloroplasts right here. Woo, chloroplasts visible in plant cells. Obviously, look at those nice regular cellulose cell walls. And here's an animal cell. And obviously all of these are all stained, by the way. These aren't their natural colors. They're stained so that they can be viewed with a light or electron microscope. These two bacteria were with electron microscopes, and then the plant cell and the animal cell were with just light microscopes. But they all have to be stained so that you can see them properly under a microscope. I think it makes them pretty though. All right, so we talked about matter. Now we're going to talk about energy. So types of energy and energy transformations are, again, a huge topic in environmental science. Energy is the ability to do work or to transfer heat, and that's the physics definition of it. Ultimately, the sun is the source for pretty much all of the energy on Earth. We've got some, deep sea vents where we've got chemicals as the driver of the ecosystem rather than the sun, but we're going to say 99% of life on Earth uses the sun as the ultimate source of energy. The sun emits electromagnetic radiation that is carried by photons that move, interestingly enough, at the speed of light. That's the spectrum down there, the electromagnetic radiation spectrum. So we'll be doing a fair amount of energy math in this course. Most of that begins in the beginning of the second semester. But in order to do that, you need to know about some of the units that we will be converting. One of those energy units is the joule. We've got the calorie. Notice that is with a little c, right? And then the calorie with a big C. That big C calorie is also called a food calorie or a kilocalorie. And it is like when you look at a food package and it tells you how many calories are in it, that's the calorie we're talking about. We're talking about kilocalories, not the calorie with a small c, which is a chemical calorie, the definition you learned in chemistry. BTUs, British thermal units, when we do energy math relating to large amounts of heat, like for coal burning power plants, we'll be using BTUs as our unit, and kilowatt hours. Kilowatt hours are energy unit associated with power production. So energy is power multiplied by time. If you flip that around, power is energy divided by time. So we will use these obviously quite a bit. Potential energy is energy that's stored but has the potential to be released. Potential energy stored in chemical bonds is called chemical energy. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. And temperature is the measure of the average kinetic energy of a substance. Temperature is actually a byproduct of molecular motion. And you guys, you learn this in chemistry, but I want to make sure that you know it because it is something actually that we talk about a fair amount. Temperature in and of itself is a byproduct of molecular motion. The higher the motion, the higher the temperature. The lower the motion of the molecules, the lower the temperature. Okay, thermodynamics. The Earth obviously follows the laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics is that energy is neither created or destroyed, but it can change forms. The second law of thermodynamics states that when energy changes forms, the quantity of energy remains the same, but its ability to do work diminishes. Every time you have an energy change from one form to another, it is not a perfect conversion. Energy transformation is not 100% efficient. It can't be. Some of the energy is always lost. That's the second law of thermodynamics. By the way, in past years, they have asked thermodynamics questions on the exam. Which of the following is an example of the first law or the second law, or which of, those kinds of things. I haven't seen those in the last 2 years' exams. However, it's fair game. They've been asked previously. Energy efficiency is the ratio of the amount of work that is done to the total amount of energy that was initially introduced to the system. So some energy conversions are quite efficient and some are not. Some are very inefficient. And so we have to be able to calculate the efficiency of any energy transformation. That's a math problem that you will be expected to know how to do. All right, and so here's an example of one of those wonderful efficiency math problems. So let's take it from the top. A coal-burning power plant can convert 1 metric ton of coal containing 24,000 megajoules of chemical energy into 8,400 megajoules of electricity. Okay, so there's our first energy conversion. Coal contains chemical energy in its chemical bonds. Okay, so the coal we already know it's a metric ton, so that's our one thing that we need to know. That metric ton contains 24,000 megajoules of chemical energy, and it is capable of producing 8,400 megajoules of electricity. Okay, so here we go. 8,400 is approximately 35% of 24,000. So the conversion in and of itself is 35% efficient. There it is, right there. Why do I keep moving these things? There. That's what I want. Okay, 35% efficient. The remaining 65% of the initial energy that was in the coal is lost as waste heat during the energy conversion process. So check this out. Most of that energy, the majority of it, is lost as heat. Now, when we say lost as heat, I want you to again think about the Earth as a system. It's not being lost like lost. It's being emitted into the Earth system. The reason we say lost is because in physics, when energy is converted into heat does not have the ability to do work. And once we've created heat from usable energy, once we've taken chemical energy and converted it into heat energy, that energy can no longer do any work, which means that it is lost to the physical system. It's still here in the Earth system, but it's not doing any productive work, so we consider that lost energy. In the electrical lines that run from the plant to the house, 10% of the energy is lost to heat and sound. So the transport is 90% efficient. And I don't know if you knew this, but electrical lines actually do lose heat. They have heat that comes out of them, and they make a sound. They hum. So some of the energy that is being transported along those lines is lost. So it's 90% efficient, which is actually pretty darn efficient. That's one of the reasons why electrical lines are heavily insulated to prevent energy loss. The conversion of electricity to light in an incandescent bulb is 5% efficient. This is one that you actually need to memorize. 95% of the incoming electrical energy is lost to heat. So incandescent light bulbs. When you look at a light bulb, the ones that have the little filament that glows inside, you guys know that those get hot, right? Well, they get really, really hot. In fact, 95% of the incoming electrical energy is actually lost to heat. Only 5% actually creates that light energy that's why we use a light bulb, is for light, not for heat. People aren't cooking on their light bulbs. So we're going to calculate the efficiency of converting coal into incandescent light from the start to the finish. Well, right here, we have our 0.35. That's our 35% efficiency from the conversion of the chemical energy in coal to the electrical energy. There's our first percentage, right? And of course, we've transformed that into a decimal. The second part is the transport of electricity. Okay, so that's 0.9% or 0.9 or 90% efficient. And then here's our light bulb efficiency, 5% efficient, 95% inefficient. When we multiply those all together, we get an overall efficiency of 1.6% or 0.016. That is very, very, very inefficient. We didn't even get to 1%. I mean, we got just barely to 1%. So think about coal to incandescent light as a system again. And when we think about it like that, we realize that there are a lot of points in this conversion process where we could increase the efficiency of that conversion process. The easiest one for a consumer is right here at the end. Ding, ding, ding. And that is, we can really increase the efficiency of the system by changing from incandescent light bulbs to either compact fluorescent light bulbs, which have a much more higher efficiency rate, or to LED light bulbs, which have even a higher efficiency rate still, meaning that they are converting more of the incoming electricity to light and less of it is lost as heat. So This is the kind of math that we're looking for. This is real world math. It's math that environmental scientists do every day. We're trying to figure out how to reduce the inefficiencies of a system. Coal is the number one way that we produce an electricity worldwide, and here also in the United States. It has a lot of chemical energy in it, but the conversion of chemical energy for coal to electricity is always going to be about 35%. So when we're talking about the reduction of the burning of coal, what can we do? Well, we can change our light bulbs, or we can change our energy source. And those are the kinds of things that we're going to be looking at. Okay, how to use math to prove environmental points, or to help us make better decisions for environmental systems and processes. Okay, so energy efficiency is related to energy quality, and that's one of the things that I kind of hinted at when we were talking about the coal thing. Coal has different grades, and we'll talk more about that later, but the higher the quality of the energy source, the more efficient it is as an energy source. So a high quality energy source has a convenient, concentrated form that is easy and cheap to transport. Coal meets that. Gasoline meets that. Gasoline is a high quality energy source because its chemical energy is concentrated, and it's easy to transport because we have extensive gasoline transport network in the United States. Wood would be considered a lower quality energy source. It produces less than half of the amount of energy per kilogram when combusted as gasoline, and it's not as easily transportable. Wood is heavy, it's bulky, it's got splinters. But anyway, so when we're talking about energy quality, we want something that's concentrated and easy to transport, and that has a lot of BTUs per unit volume. All systems, including the universe, tend towards entropy. I love entropy. I don't know why, but I just think it's a cool idea. Okay, so all systems tend toward entropy. What is entropy? Entropy is a measure of disorder. That's that's basically the second law of thermodynamics, that every time we do an energy conversion, and energy conversions happen every single millisecond of every single day in every single living thing in this entire universe. Obviously, we really only know about what's happening on this planet, but those energy conversions, every single one of them is losing energy to heat. That's why you have a body temperature, because every single one of your metabolic reactions loses part of its energy to heat. Heat is disorder. Heat is entropy. Heat is the most entropic or disordered form of energy because, again, it has no ability to do work. When an energy transformation produces a lot of heat, and again, think back to our example, such as our cold to incandescent light example, it's considered very inefficient. Heat energy is considered wasted or lost energy, and I've already said this, because it cannot be reconverted into a more ordered form of energy that can do work. This violates the second law of thermodynamics. You can always go down in the levels of energy and its ability to do work, but you can't go back up. That's not how physics works. So once something is converted to heat, it's lost to the system. So energy conversions, starting with incoming solar radiation or chemical energy emitted from the deep sea vents, are the basis for every ecological process on Earth. The greater the amount of incoming solar or chemical energy, the greater the biomass of an area. Energetic systems can either be open or closed. In an open system, exchanges of matter and energy occur across system boundaries. In a closed system, there is no matter or energy exchange. Again, I want you to think of Earth as a system. Open systems are more common than closed systems here on the planet. Earth is an open system in terms of energy because we receive incoming energy from the sun every day, but it's mostly a closed system in terms of matter. The matter that is here that we work with every day is the matter that was here when the planet was created. And besides a few bombardments from stuff that get into the atmosphere and a few things that we send off and leave out there like space junk, it's closed in terms of matter. Systems analysis focuses on the inputs and outputs in a given system. Now, this is different than systems thinking. Systems thinking is the theoretical framework that we'll be using to examine environmental questions throughout this year. Systems analysis, or systems analysts, they focus on what goes into a system and what comes out of a given system. And obviously, you can imagine that this is pretty important in environmental systems and environmental analysis. When inputs equal outputs in a system, we have a steady state or an equilibrium that's achieved. In environmental science, studying inputs, outputs, and equilibrium states can tell us a lot about the health of an ecosystem. Undisturbed natural systems tend toward equilibrium. And the reason why is that they have self-sustaining positive and negative feedback loops. I want you to think about the concept of homeostasis in biology. This is the Earth equivalent of homeostasis. You guys know homeo means same, stasis means state. So in an organism strives for homeostasis. How does it do that? Well, there's biological feedback loops that help it maintain homeostasis. The Earth also has an equilibrium. Every system on Earth has an equilibrium, and the Earth also has self-sustaining positive and negative feedback loops that help to sustain this equilibrium in undisturbed natural systems. Now, that's kind of hard to define because pretty much every system on Earth has been altered by humans. So some of this is stuff that we have to infer or extrapolate from our data because even the very presence of a human in some systems alters it. So this slide is illustrating some positive and negative feedback loops for Earth systems. And if you're familiar with the same idea in biology, which maintains homeostasis, positive and negative feedback loops, or in biology, we call them excitatory and inhibitory feedback loops, same deal here. So let's take a look up here real quick. I'm up here. In a positive feedback loop, a change in a system amplifies further changes. That means when there's a change in a system, there is a greater, that change amplifies further changes. Here in this example, an increase in temperature, right there, leads to a thawing of the permafrost, which leads to an increase, right there, in greenhouse gases emitted from the thawing permafrost, which leads, there it is right there, carbon dioxide and methane, which are released into the atmosphere. Those are greenhouse gases. We abbreviate that GHG in this class, greenhouse gases. And greenhouse gases trap heat in the atmosphere. So when you trap heat in the atmosphere, what happens to the temperature of the Earth? Well, it goes up. So the change, which was increasing temperature, causes increasing or amplification of further system changes. Down here, we're in a negative feedback loop situation here. By the way, in general, Earth systems, there are more examples of positive feedback loops than negative feedback loops. In biological systems, the opposite is true. Most biological systems are inhibitory feedback loops. In Earth systems, most are excitatory or positive feedback loops. In a negative feedback loop, a change in the system inhibits further changes. So here, the level of a lake drops. There we are right there. The lake level drops. And there's the negative sign right here that tells me it's an inhibitory change, right? Or it's a negative change. So the level of the lake drops and it leads to a reduced surface area. Okay, so here's our negative and here's our reduced surface area. Okay, the reduced surface area leads to reduced evaporation. Okay, and there's our negative again, which eventually stabilizes the lake level. Okay, now again, this half of it is a inhibitory or a negative feedback loop. When the level rises, we get back to hopefully a normal lake level. But because the original change inhibits these the inhibitory, the reduced surface area, and the less evaporation, we would consider this a negative feedback loop. And again, pure negative feedback loops are actually pretty hard to find in Earth systems. Most of them have a negative portion of them and then something that brings the state back into equilibrium at the very end of it. Okay, so one thing to note, and you guys should already know this, but the idea of positive and negative feedback loops does not have anything to do with our brain thinking that they're good or bad. I have to remind my freshmen of this and they can't seem to remember it, but I think you guys can, right? Positive feedback loops are not good necessarily, and negative feedback loops are not necessarily bad. They don't have anything to do with that. The words negative and positive have very specific meanings in science in terms of feedback loops. And remember, positive is an amplification. Negative is where it inhibits, or again, in biological systems, we'd call those excitatory or inhibitory. The health of Earth's systems depends, it really depends on the proper functioning of feedback loops. When humans upset the inputs and the outputs of the feedback of the systems, the feedback loops do not function properly, and you start to see a destabilization of natural systems and natural cycles. This is what is actually happening with a lot of our biogeochemical cycles, not just on a local level, which local level biogeochemical cycles can be completely destroyed or completely interrupted. But even on the global scale, these feedback loops can be very, very, very damaged when the inputs and outputs of a system are disrupted by human activity.